Hello, Jean Becnel. We're in Point Capee Parish in Jarrow, technically. We're at the guest residence of Dr. Jack Holden and Miss Pat Holden. This is an 1820 house. It's called the Bayou House as far as the property is situated. It was moved in approximately 20 years ago. It was in danger of destruction, and the Holdens were very meticulous in saving the structure and bringing it back to what it would have looked like in its former days. There are some issues, being it's been here for 20 years. Preservation is an ongoing effort, and so I'm out here today mainly working on the roof. There were some foundation issues we've addressed early on. There are some more that we're going to have to address in the future, but we're starting in the house because this is what the roof protects, and this is what we're protecting is the furniture and everything, the story that goes into this house itself. So there's a lot of concepts involved in protecting a house like this. It's not as easy as bringing in new materials and new ideas into an old structure. We really need to preserve the old building techniques for the most part. That tends to be where we get the most lifespan and the most protection for the structure. They're designed to work in a manner with nature and with the elements as opposed to trying to shut them out. And the houses, we found out, last a lot better this way. Early building construction techniques were developed over thousands of years. They had plenty of time to work out what worked best. And now, in the last 50 years or so, we've concerned ourselves with saving these buildings. And unfortunately, we've introduced a lot of modern materials and techniques into the process. Now that we're this far into the preservation efforts, we're starting to really learn that those, while well-meaning, weren't in the best interest of the structures. One of the biggest issues is compartmentalization. So if we take a house like this and we put a modern roof on it, when we put floor vapor barriers underneath the floor and all this, we end up compartmentalizing the moisture into the house and causing further damage than what we would otherwise. So we're going to go outside, we're going to look at the roof, maybe look at a little bit of the structure, the foundation issues we had, and I'll talk about why this roof is important and why it's unique to this house. And this is the rear side of the 1820 Bayou House. And this was the first side we worked on for the roof, purposes of the roof. You can see there's a pretty extensive tree cover over it. Everybody loves their live oaks. Unfortunately, the branches were resting on the roof before they were cut off. That was done prior to us coming out here. They removed the branches. But anywhere the branches were sitting on the roof, those were the spots where water was intruding into the building because it held moisture in those spots. So speaking of holding moisture, moisture is detrimental to any natural material that we can build a house with. It's a problem for wood, masonry, lime, mortar, bousillage. This house is a bousillage house, which I think you'll get a look at. The Holdens have left a small portion open to show the construction, the essentially wattle and daub type of construction of the bousillage. And so in terms of moisture, when this house was moved here 20 years ago, we didn't fully understand why the previous builders did the things they do. Now we have a better understanding of that, and it's primarily to remove moisture from the structure. So moisture has to move through the structure in order to keep the structure healthy. If we put a metal roof or we put vapor barriers in place and then put shingles on, those wooden shingles on top, those wooden shingles will never dry out fully and they rot from the inside out, and we'll get leaks into the structure and will cause damage on the structure. Also, moisture will always migrate from the lowest point in the house up through the structure. So as that moisture moves upwards, it has to leave the structure somehow. And if we put a moisture barrier on the roof, we've now trapped that moisture in the structure. So when this roof was put on, they did what was called, they used felt paper, and they used it in two ways. They completely felted the top of the purlin. This is not solid sheeted, by the way. This is open purlins, which we'll see on the front of the house. They felted the roof, and then what they did was they put down skip layers of felt. And how that works is there's a layer of shingles, and there's felt, shingles, and it's sort of a compromise in a sense to try and prevent, to allow the shingles to breathe. However, it's just not sufficient, especially with a solid layer of felt paper underneath it. So as we rebuild this roof, we've not put any felt back in place. The only exception to that is at the ridge, because the coverage is less at the ridge. So that being said, the felt does not cover the ridge. The felt stops and allows for a gap at the top where the ridge cap will go. And that will allow the entire roof to absorb moisture from inside and expel it out the top. So any moisture that moves through the house, moves through the bousillage and woodwork, It's going to find its way to the attic and leave through natural evaporation. So that's two benefits to that the older houses would have been built for this reason. One, you don't trap moisture in the house, you let the moisture out. But two, the process of evaporation and the moisture moving through the house works similar to what we see in swamp coolers out in the drier climates. That evaporation process cools the house, and with cross ventilation, we can stay relatively comfortable throughout the day. All right, we're back and we're on the roof now. Let's talk about the shingle options we have for a roof like this. There are a lot of options out there. For this particular roof, we're using a blue ribbon, our #1 taper split shingle rather, or shake. There's a debate about what you call what. We're not going to get into that. So you'll see that the butt end is thicker and there's a thin end at the top, and the way they work is each shingle is successively stacked on the next one. So what appears to be really thin and dainty, once it's all said and done, you can see they're overlaid on top of each other. I mentioned that there was no felt on the roof, but however we have utilized flashing at this transition in the roof, and the reason for that is as the water comes down, water migrates from the top and it's always running down. We have a lot of potential for splashback in any transition or valley. So in a valley we would copper flash. In a transition like this, we're going to go ahead and do a galvanized flashing. And how this works is we've got really tight courses right here to increase the coverage of the shingles. We've got a double starter course here, just like at the bottom of the roof. And we've got flashing underneath it, and that prevents any water from escaping into the roof. Also, these shingles continue into the roof where these come down. So if you go into the attic space, you can see daylight through the flashing, and you can see the shingle tails, top end of the shingle sticking through. And the whole point of a wooden shingle roof is no one spot is doing all the work. It uses gravity and the nature of water to seek its own level, and it's all about passing the buck to the next layer. So that said, you can't have any weak points, and we'll get back to let's talk about the shingles again though, the choices. So like I said, this is a blue ribbon #1. It's a taper split. There are sawn shingles, there are split shingles, there are longer splits that I would call shakes. And there are different options for the reveal, and there's different options for the thickness of the shingle. What we're doing here is a 7.5 inch reveal. That means there's 7.5 inches from the butt of the shingle to the top of the next shingle, and that is the maximum reveal that the manufacturer recommends for these shingles. Now, I normally would do a smaller reveal. I would normally do something in the 5 inch range, something about, well, let's say like that. And the reason for that is it allows for 3 layers of protection. We went back with what was original to the previous roofing efforts that were done in the interest of time and budget on the project. So I'll show when we get to the other side of the roof, we'll look at what determines the overlay on the shingles and how we would have to, what we would have to change in order to change that overlay. It is a planning process from start to finish, how we put these shingles on. You'll see that all the shingles have good overlap, and by that, the shingles never line up on the edge. You want at least 1 inch to 1.5 inches of overlap ideally. The more overlap, the better. Sometimes you'll get really, really wide shingles in the bundle, which is awesome, but you don't want to use a super wide shingle. You want to keep them a little bit, this is about as wide as you would want to go. And you're going to nail, if this is sitting on the raft, and we'll look at this on the other side, but your nails are always going to be hidden by the next course. And when the next course goes in, the nail for this one goes through the previous shingle, and everything gets double nailed and everything gets held in place. So the fireplace there has some flashing work left to be done. There's going to be some replacement step flashing put in. There's undercoursing and there's overcoursing and step flashing that happens when you have a transition to a masonry building. And you can see that the ridge is left open because what we're going to do is as we get to the top from the other side, then we're going to tie those 2 sides in together with a cap. And the cap will not be, it will basically be old growth red cypress that's ripped wide, and it will sit horizontally across the ridge. There will be one, maybe 2 more courses that go up on this side, and then everything will come together. And like I told you, there's felt only on this layer. So the felt comes down about here. Essentially, we cut a roll of felt in half just to get protection here to increase our coverage. And you can see all the layers of old felt shingles that
sticking through to the other side, but this ridge will be left open. There's no felt put there. And that'll allow some ventilation and some movement of moisture and allow these shingles to stay dry. Branches are always a problem. This roof should last 20 to 30 years, but that's dependent upon the climate and where you live, the climate and the environment of the nature of the weather that you have. So roofs want to be in the shade to a certain extent, but they also have to have really good ventilation and airflow. So if you've got an old house and you're concerned about the shingles, make sure the first thing to do is make sure that you've got good airflow around the house. And now we're up on the roof on the construction side. You can see that how awful the state of the existing roof was. It's covered in lichen and mold, and it's rotting, dry rot and wet rot, all the above. Now this side of the roof, this under what encompasses of what's over the gallery area right here, didn't have tar paper on it. So this side did last a little better than the back side. It's got some tar paper, but not solid sheeted like the back was. And you can definitely see the difference from one side to the other. Now, like I said, we're not using tar paper, and you can see how these work in a stepping pattern. So you start at the bottom. Because of the overlay on this, you see at any given point, there's always at least 2 layers of coverage over the roof. And for that reason, when we start at the bottom, we start a double course. So you can see there's 2 shingles stacked on top of each other here. And what that means is we come in and put a shingle there, and then there's another shingle that comes on top in line with it. And then as we work our way up, the next shingle will go there, and so forth. Normally on a house, when we're doing a roof like this, what we'd need to do is we'd come in and rip the entire roof off. The reason we didn't do that on this house, and this is a little bit less productive to do it in phases, is because of the nature of the house and the schedule we're in the rainy season right now. And I didn't trust tarping the roof for a week at a time and hoping that no rain got in the house. So what we're doing is we're essentially stripping off whatever we can replace in that day or the following day, weather depending, and we're working our way up. It is much quicker to start at the top and work down, because if you work in reverse, you're not fighting the courses above it. So these are called purlins. If this was a sheeted roof, this would really be called the sheeting rather than that. And when I talked about making a decision based on how your overlap with your shingles is it's entirely dependent upon the purlin layout. So this is a layout block that we use for shingles, for doing wooden shingles. And the distance from here to here should be the overlay. So when we set it here, can you see that?
Yeah.
We set it there, that's going to be the space that each shingle goes up. We've got a space set here that tells us the rate overlap, so the edge of the roof. And then we've got another space here, this is 1.5 inches, that tells us the overlap for our drip edge. So when we set our shingles, we're going to set this, we'll set that there, and the shingle comes down to that block. When we're overlapping, if this is the side of the roof, we're going to do it this way, and that way we keep a nice straight line up the roof. And then if let's just say that we were going up our next course, the block sets there, and the shingle drops to that point, and that keeps us consistent. Every 4 to 5 courses, depending on, because I'll pull a tape and see where we're at. No roof is going to be perfectly square. We'll snap a line and we'll work to that line. So we may go 3 or 4 courses and realize we're about 1/4 inch off from side to side from where we want to end up at the top, and we'll snap a line, and that little variance won't really make a difference. We always go less than, so we're going to subtract from the 7.5 though. We're not going to add to it, because 7.5 is the maximum allowable overlay on the roof. So when we're determining what the overlay on this is going to be, if you look at the purlins here, you'll see that the bottom of this purlin to the top of this purlin is what this block is set for, and that's 7.5 inches. If the block or the layout is not consistent with the purlins, you end up nailing on the face where you can see it, or you're nailing too high on the shingle to support the shingle. So this bottom one's going to be different because it's the bottom of the roof. You start at the top. But those purlins have to be laid out at whatever the overlay the shingle job calls for. So if we would have been coming into this and said, okay, so The existing roof was a 7.5. We want to come back with a 5. We would have had to remove all of the purlins, replace or just move the purlins in order to come back with a different overlay course. So that's why it takes a little bit of layout, it takes a little bit of planning before the job is started, and then it'll keep you on track. So that's the layout block. It doesn't take very long to make these, and it's very, very handy, especially if you have multiple volunteers or multiple people working on the roof. Another thing you'll need is definitely to apply the shingles is a shingle hatchet or shingle. You know, it's basically a hammer with a cutting edge on the back. So what we'll do is when we're coming to the end of the roof or we're trying to tie in two places, so if we start and work towards each other, you're not going to have the perfect shingle to finish that course. So we'll take the shingle like so and split the shingle to whatever size we need. Also, a lot of times the shingles will be inconsistently shaped, such as this one. You've got a ridge there. So we'll just set it down and we'll trim the shingle to the size we need it, and we can put it in. While we're laying the shingles, we don't want them super tight together. We also don't want very large gaps. We want a little bit of room because the roof is made out of wood. So as the rain impacts the roof, it's going to expand and contract a bit. That's to be expected. We don't want it to pop itself up like a floor. Whenever a wood floor is applied too tight, it absorbs moisture and it buckles. Everyone's kind of familiar with that situation. Same thing can happen with a wooden roof. So this little video was brought to you by the Louisiana Trust for Historic Preservation. I hope you enjoyed it. Give them some love. I'm a member. You should be too. They're doing good work, like coming up here and showing you a little bit about what it takes to replace a wooden shingle roof. Also, if you're endeavoring to do this yourself or you have a contractor who's going to do this for you, I would highly recommend looking at some of the videos by Bernie Weisgerber with the National Forestry Service. He's since retired, I believe moved to Hawaii. Lucky him. But there's a great video series out there. It talks about every aspect of and how to train volunteers to do this. If you're a museum site, there's a lot of good safety tips in there. Also, I'm the previous historic preservationist for the Rural Life Museum at Louisiana State University. So I had a lot of volunteer work when we were doing these before the private sector work, and I have had people come off of roofs the wrong way. They've fallen. Make sure that you're considering fall arresting devices if you're going to have volunteers on a roof or your contractors on a roof. Generally, they're not going to, they're not as much of a concern. But thankfully, we had those procedures, those safety restraints in place, and so nobody's gotten hurt yet. So just those are some things to consider. And if you're unsure, unfooted on, not well footed on a roof, make sure that you take safety precautions as well. There are a lot of different tools that go into doing this roof. I didn't really go over everything. This isn't intended to be a how-to video necessarily, as it is some things to think about before you endeavor to do this yourself or find a contractor. So just make sure that you check out the National Forestry Service videos, do some more research, find out what's correct for your climate and your environment. Again, we're in South Louisiana, so we're a little unique here. And again, I hope you enjoyed this.